9 men crossed the main street of Kettle Rise in leg irons at 6 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and 19 names went into the book that counted them. Nobody in that town could make that arithmetic come out. Nobody tried. Kettle Rise, Arizona Territory, 1888, September, the kind of heat that arrives before the sun does and stays long after it leaves. That dries a nail hole in a plank until the plank splits itself for no reason anyone can name. The copper works sat above the town on a bench of red rock, and the town sat below it in the gray shade of the tailings, quiet, patient, well-fed. On the boardwalk outside the hotel, a stranger stood with a cup of coffee he had not tasted, watching the chain go by. He had ridden in the night before on a black horse. He wore a brown felt hat pulled low, a patterned wool poncho gone soft with dust, and a gun belt with 1 Colt in it, and in that Colt there were 5 cartridges and 1 empty chamber. Because he rested the hammer on nothing, the way careful men did, so a fall or a kick could not fire the gun into his own leg. It was a small habit. It was older than most of the men on that chain. In 9 days it would decide who in Kettle Rise lived and who did not, and nobody watching him drink cold coffee could have told you why. He counted the chain as it passed. 9 men. He counted it twice, because he had ridden 200 miles to count, and the number he had come for was 19. 3 weeks before, in a town far north of there, he had read a public notice set in the smallest type a county newspaper could buy. It said the county had leased the labor of its convicted vagrants to the Ansel Copper Company at $9 a head each month, the count to be furnished by the sheriff and signed at the collar of the shaft. He read it once for the words and once for the arithmetic. Then he folded the paper into his saddlebag and turned the black horse south. No man was ever held by iron. Men are held by arithmetic. The ordinance in Kettle Rise was 1 sentence long. Any man found inside the town limits without visible means of support could be taken up as a vagrant and sentenced to 90 days of labor at the pleasure of the county. It did not require a victim. It did not require a witness. It required a man's pockets to be empty and a sheriff to be the one who looked in them. There were 2 powers in that town, and they were married to each other. The company owned the hill, the water, the store, and the assay scale. The sheriff owned the road. The company needed men for a shaft that killed a certain number of them every year, and a man with wages in his pocket can walk to the next hill and take better ones. So the company stopped buying men by the day and started renting them by the head, and the sheriff filled the order. And the town watched it for 11 months and said the thing towns say. They must have done something. The order did not come from the hill. On the 15th of every month a letter came in from a paneled office in Washington, and it never mentioned a shaft or a chain or a man. It mentioned tonnage. It was signed by Augustus Thane, who had discovered somewhere in his 40s that you do not have to be cruel if you can arrange for cruelty to be an expense on somebody else's ledger. He is the man this story is actually about, and he does not appear in it, and that is the point. Everett Pike had been sheriff 6 years. 48, out of Missouri, a stock detective before he ever wore a star. The territory credited him with 8 men killed. The true number was 11. He kept the tally book in his breast pocket, a narrow ledger bound in green cloth, and he licked his thumb before he turned each page, and men who watched him do it said it made a worse sound than a hammer coming back. Wilkins Stroud was 29, and he was the one who brought them in. 6 men dead, 4 of them shot while resisting, which in that county meant shot. Stroud had never in his life bought a gun. Every pistol he ever carried came off a man who had stopped needing it, and he wore each one until a better one came into the drawer at the jail. He had a thief's eye for a fine weapon and a thief's blindness about it, which is a distinction with no meaning at all until one morning when it has all the meaning in the world. Amos Teal, 51, was the company timekeeper. He had taught school in Ohio, and he had never struck a man or fired a gun, and if you called him a killer, he would have been honestly, wetly offended. His weapon was a pencil. Every morning he stood at the collar and signed for the count the sheriff gave him, and he had never once walked to the edge and looked down, because he believed arithmetic was a neutral thing, like water. Water is not neutral. Ask anyone who has drowned. Orrin Rusk, the superintendent, was 42, and he wore gloves indoors. He had never killed a man with his own hands and had signed for 31. He read the tonnage sheets before he read his own mail, and for 11 months those sheets had been lying to him. He was paying for 19 men. He was getting the work of 9. He had written 3 letters to Washington explaining that the ore was harder than the survey promised, and Washington had written back to say other men found other ore and made their numbers anyway. And there was Cobb Farron, 35, the shaft boss, born to a Cornish father who died underground at 40. 12 men had died under Farron's timbering, and he could give you all 12 names, in order, with the dates. He chewed a corner of candle wax when he was thinking. He was the only man on that hill who went down every shift he sent other men down, and that is why this story has an ending instead of a headstone. The chain was 9 men, and 9 men is not a number. It is 9 men. There was a boy named Cassius Ward, 19, walking to his sister's wedding with a bedroll, a letter, and 40 cents, who crossed the town limit at 4 in the afternoon and was in leg irons by 6, because 40 cents is not visible means of support. There was a deaf man who had lost his hearing in a powder blast and could not answer a deputy fast enough. There was a man discharged from the works for arguing about a scale, then arrested standing on the road, unemployed, which was the crime. And there was Mose Halloran, 61, who had been on that chain 11 months on a 90-day sentence. That is not a mistake in the telling. At the end of each 90 days, the county took Halloran out of his irons, walked him to the edge of town with nothing in his pockets, and arrested him for having nothing in his pockets. He had been convicted 3 separate times of being a vagrant while in the custody of the county that made him one. He thought it was funny. He was the only one who did. Cassius Ward had a sister, and her name was Nell. She was 24 and took in washing at the hotel, and every Sunday she came up the hill with bread wrapped in a cloth and was never allowed nearer than the wire fence at the bottom of the ore road, so she stood there and held it up where her brother could see it and could not have it. She had done that 11 times. On the 12th Sunday, a man in a dusty poncho stood at the fence beside her, and when she finally spoke, she asked the question the whole town had trained itself not to ask. "How many are up there?" "9, the stranger said. "They say 19. I know what they say." She looked at him then, really looked, the way you look at a stranger who has handed you the only true sentence you have heard in a year. You've counted. Twice that evening he brought the black horse to the yard behind her rooming house and put the reins in her hand, and with them a roll of money and the county notice folded small. 12 days, he said. Feed him and don't ride him. If I'm not back, he's yours, and so is the money. Where are you going? Nowhere. That's the whole trick of it. Nell Ward held the reins of a horse worth more than her year and looked at a man about to make himself worthless on purpose, and she did the arithmetic and went white. They'll take you up. For nothing. You've done nothing. That's the charge, he said. Nothing. It's the only charge they've got, and the only one I can't be acquitted of. He walked into the main street the next morning with empty pockets. No horse. No money. He walked the length of it twice, slow, in front of the jail, which was a thing no man in that town did unless he was employed, and by the second pass, Wilkins Stroud was on the step with his thumbs in his belt, looking at the good boots and the very good gun belt. You working, mister? No. Got money? No. Stroud took the Colt out of the holster and turned it over, and his smile went into something else. The private, greedy stillness of a man looking at the best thing he has ever been handed for free. It was a beautiful gun, worn to the hand, sighted honest, the walnut gone the color of dark honey. Everett Pike came out and looked in the stranger's pockets and found lint and a horseshoe nail. "Name," Pike said. The stranger said nothing. Pike waited. Then he took out the green ledger, licked his thumb, turned a page, and wrote the only thing the book cared about. Unknown, male, sound. Beside it he wrote the price, $9, because the arithmetic did not care what your mother had called you. 90 days, Pike said. Then put the irons on me, the stranger said. He let it happen. Every man in that street watched it, and not one understood what he was looking at. The irons went on his wrists and his ankles, and a deputy shoved him toward the ore road, and behind him his Colt went into the confiscation drawer, into the dark, with the hammer resting where he had left it, on nothing. The chain went down at 6:30 and came up at 6:30, 12 hours in a stope where the rock stood at 104 degrees. The company issued each man a pound and a half of beef and bread a day, because it had run the numbers on that too, and knew to the ounce what it cost to keep a rented man walking. At the collar every morning, in the gray before the sun cleared the ridge, Everett Pike read the names out of the green book, and Amos Teal marked them and signed. That was the whole ceremony. The county furnishes the count. The company signs at the collar. The stranger had read that line 200 miles north and understood that the machine turned on one hinge. Nobody counted the men. They counted the count. On his first morning he heard Pike call 19 names and heard 9 men answer. And he listened to a deaf man answer to a name that was not his, and then answer again to a second name that was not his either, and the stranger did not move a muscle in his face. That night Halloran told him, in the dark, in the sheds, with the chain running through all their ankles like a spine. "You answer twice," the old man said. "That's the trade. He calls a name with no man behind it. You say here, and you eat. You don't say here, you don't eat, and the sheriff writes you down as difficult, and difficult men get sent to the bad face where the ground's rotten. 9 of us. 19 names. Work it out. 10 of you are dead." 10 of us are dead, Halloran agreed comfortably, the way a man agrees about weather. Rodmacher, 2 Delaneys, no relation. Fellow called Pitts, some others. They're in the old stope with the ground on top of them, and their names are still in that book drawing $9 a month, and every one of us carries one of them like a second shirt. Why don't you stop? Because we'd starve. And who'd we tell? Halloran laughed, one dry note. The sheriff? He writes the book. The company? The company's paying, and the company's happy. The town? Son, the town's heard us answer twice every morning for 11 months. Fence ain't that far from the road. The stranger lay in the dark with iron on his ankles and thought a long time. Not about Pike. Pike was a symptom. He thought about a schoolteacher with a pencil, and a man in gloves reading tonnage, and a man in Washington. "When does the man who signs come?" he asked. "Teal signs every day." "No, the one who signs for the money." "First Monday of the month. Rusk comes up in a buggy with a lease sheet and puts his name to the count and pays the county for the whole 19 of us." Halloran turned his head in the dark. "Why? How many days is that?" 9. Now, before the rest of this happens, you should know that the paper was real. The writer is not. But the paper was. After the war, more than a dozen states and territories wrote laws exactly like that one, and they were called vagrancy laws, and the crime they punished was the crime of empty pockets. Not theft. Not violence. Poverty, written in legal language. A man walking between one job and the next was, for the length of that walk, a criminal, and any sheriff who needed a body could have one. And the counties did not keep those men. They rented them. Convict leasing was a public, legal, advertised business, and the notices ran in county newspapers where anyone could read them, at rates you can still look up, because the market priced a rented man exactly as it priced a rented mule. It was not a secret. Nobody hid it. It was audited by nobody, because the man who counted the men worked for the man who sold them. That was not a flaw in the system. That was the system. On the seventh day, the ground came in at the bad face. Cobb Ferrin was 40 feet away and heard it start, which is the only warning ground ever gives, a sound like a man clearing his throat behind you. And he shouted, and they ran, and 8 of them made it. Mose Halloran, 61 years old, serving his 4th 90-day sentence for the crime of being a man the county had already ruined, did not. Ferrin went in after him twice. The second time, the timber above him talked, and 2 of his own men pulled him out backward by the belt. He came up at noon and stood in front of Orrin Rusk and said they had to go in for him. And Rusk, who was not a monster and had a number in his head that had lied to him for 11 months, said the ground was not safe. That was true. That was the end of it. The company did not bring up what it could not sell. The stranger stood at the collar that afternoon and watched a shaft boss cry in front of 11 men and not be allowed to be a good man. The next morning, Pike came out with the green book. He licked his thumb. He turned the page. He read the names, and he came to Halloran, and there was nothing behind it, because there was no longer anybody in the world who would answer to it, and Pike lifted his eyes off the page and went down the line and stopped where the light was worst. "You," he said to the man the book called Unknown. "You've been carrying a light load. You'll take Halloran." And the stranger in irons, ankle-chained to 8 men 30 hours after watching an old man's name become a piece of property, said, "All right." He let it happen. Twice now. He did not sleep that night. He sat with his back against the shed wall, which was the closest thing to a wall at his back he'd had in 9 days, and did the only work he had come to Kettle Rise to do. "Monday," he said into the dark. "What about it?" said a man named Rife Coldwell, 40, longest on the chain now that Halloran was under the hill. Monday, Rusk comes up in his buggy and stands at the collar and signs for 19 men. Not Pike, not Teal. Rusk, with the lease sheet and the money. He's never counted us in his life. He's never had to. So on Monday, when Pike calls the dead, nobody answers. The shed went very still. It was the stillness of 9 men who have been well trained. "They'll starve us," Coldwell said. "For one morning. They'll send us to the bad face. The bad face is closed. There's an old man in it. He'll shoot somebody," Cassius Ward said. His voice was a boy's voice, and it cracked in the middle, and he was 19, and his sister was standing at a fence a quarter-mile downhill with bread she was not allowed to hand him. "Mister, he'll shoot one of us just to make the rest answer." "He might," the stranger said. "So here's the arithmetic, and I'll say it once, and then you decide, because it isn't mine to decide. Rusk pays the county $9 a head for 19 men. 10 of those heads are in the ground. That's $90 a month walking out of that company's pocket into that sheriff's coat, and it's been walking 11 months. Rusk doesn't know. He's been writing to Washington, swearing the ore is hard, and Washington keeps writing back calling him a liar, and he has never once been able to explain why. Monday morning, for the length of one roll call, he finds out a sheriff has been picking his pocket with a pencil. You're not asking Rusk to be good. Good men are not in this. You're asking him to be robbed out loud in front of his own guards. Nobody said anything for a while. "That's it?" Coldwell said finally. "That's the whole of it? We just don't talk?" "You've been talking for 11 months, the stranger said. That's what they bought." Monday came up white and hot, and the buggy came up the ore road at 6:10 with Orrin Rusk in it, gloves on, lease sheet in a leather case. Amos Teal stood at the collar with the book. 6 company guards with Winchesters stood spaced along the road under Cobb Ferrin, who had not spoken in 3 days. Wilkins Stroud stood behind the chain with a new pistol on his hip, the finest gun he had ever put on, and he had worn it 9 days and never once opened the loading gate to see how a careful man had left it. Everett Pike took out the green book. He licked his thumb. Rademacher. Nothing. Pike's eyes came up. In 11 months, that word had never once come back empty, and the shape of the morning changed for him faster than for anybody else there, because he was the only man on that hill who knew exactly what a silence was worth. Rademacher, he said again. Nothing. 9 men stood in the white light with their eyes front and their mouths shut. Delaney, nothing. Delaney, nothing. Amos Teal's pencil stopped. He looked at the book. He looked at the chain. And the timekeeper who had taught arithmetic to children and believed for 51 years that numbers were a clean thing that could not be made to lie, began, at last, to count men instead of names, and his lips moved, and he got to 9, and did it again, and got to 9. Pitts, Pike said. His voice was wrong now. Nothing. Orrin Rusk stepped down out of the buggy with the lease sheet in his hand. 19 names. 9 voices. 10 silences. Sheriff, Rusk said, in the flat, careful voice of a proud man doing arithmetic in public for the first time in his life, how many men do I have? And Everett Pike, who had killed 11 men and never once been asked a question he could not turn a page on, reached for his gun. 2 things happened in the same half-second. Pike's hand went to his holster, and Wilkins Stroud, standing behind the chain, drew the beautiful pistol he had taken for free out of a drawer, put it at the back of the stranger's head from 4 feet, and thumbed the hammer. Click, nothing, an empty chamber, where a careful man had rested his hammer for 30 years. 1 heartbeat of nothing at all, the cheapest, oldest habit in the West, taken off a man by a thief who had never bought a gun and had therefore never learned how another man loads one. The stranger was already turning. He did not have a gun. He had 18 inches of chain between his wrists, and he put it across Stroud's forearm and broke it in 2 places, and the Colt came loose in the air, and the man who owned it took it out of the air with his ironed hands. Bang! Everett Pike's right hand came apart at the wrist, the hand that licked the thumb, the hand that turned the page, the hand that had written unknown, mail, sound, and put $9 beside it. His gun never cleared leather. Wilkins Stroud, on his knees with one arm hanging, reached with the other for the second gun in his boot, because Wilkins Stroud always had another man's gun. Bang! 2 deputies had their hands halfway to their belts, and they looked at a man standing in a chain gang in leg irons with a smoking Colt, and both arrived at the correct conclusion at the same moment and raised their hands. 6 Winchesters came up along the ore road. The stranger did not point his gun at any of them. He turned it in his hand and held it out flat, and spoke to the only man there whose name was on the money. Mr. Rusk. You've been paying a sheriff $90 a month for 10 men who are under that hill. 11 months. Your ore was never hard. You've been buying the dead and blaming the rock and writing to Washington to apologize for it. He tipped his head at the timekeeper. Mr. Teal has counted. Ask him twice, he'll get the same answer both times. There was a long moment on that ore road. Cobb Farron broke it, and all he said was, "Whose money is it? Mr. Rusk?" Orrin Rusk looked at 9 men where 19 were supposed to be, and he was not a good man, and he did not become one that morning. He had just been shown the exact shape of the thing that had humiliated him for 11 months, and it had a face, and the face was sitting in the dirt, holding what was left of its wrist. "Lower them," Rusk said. "Lower them. God Almighty. Lower them." The rifles came down. The stranger crouched in front of Everett Pike and picked the green ledger out of the dust with 2 fingers and did not open it. "You'll want to know what you're being taken for," he said quietly, "and you're not going to like the shape of it. You will not hang for Halloran. You will not hang for Rademacher or the Delaneys or Pitts. There is not a court in this territory that will say those names out loud, because a dead vagrant has nothing to sue with. You'll go to Yuma for $90 a month, not the men, the money. You stole from a company." He set the book down on the sheriff's knees, gently, like a man returning a hat. That's the only kind of theft this country has ever really punished. And it was never a fast hand that caught you. It was a slow one. With a pencil, he straightened and looked down the chain at 8 silent men and a boy of 19 with a hand that would never close right again, crushed under the timber that killed Mose Halloran, and he said the last of it to them and not to Pike at all. No man was ever held by iron. Men are held by arithmetic. Here is what the reckoning bought, because you should have all of it, and not only the part that feels good. Wilkins Stroud was buried on the hill in a box the company charged the county for, wearing his own clothes and nobody else's gun. Everett Pike was tried in Prescott that winter and convicted of defrauding the Ansel Copper Company of $990, and he went to Yuma for 7 years. And the 10 dead men were not named in the indictment, not once, because there was no party to complain of them. Amos Teal was not charged with anything at all. He kept his pencil and his job, and he signs a count in a different county now, and he counts men, and he sleeps well, and that may be the most frightening sentence in this story. Cobb Farron is still shaft boss and now knows 13 names in order, with the dates. Orrin Rusk made his tonnage in the spring because with the fraud gone, the county had to deliver 19 actual men or none, and Washington read his numbers and promoted him. The reward for having been robbed 11 months was a better office. And the ordinance stayed on the books. That is the part nobody wants. The law was never repealed. The chain came off 9 men because a sheriff's signature was suddenly worth nothing. And Cassius Ward walked down that hill with a hand like a bag of gravel, and his sister took him home and married in October with her brother standing up beside her, holding his hat in the wrong hand. But the county still had an ordinance 1 sentence long, and the company still needed men who could not walk to the next hill, and within 4 months the contract moved 2 counties east to a sheriff nobody has written a story about at $11 a head, which was a raise. Mose Halloran is still in the old stope. They never took him out. The only thing in the world that changed for Mose Halloran is that his name came off a page. In Washington, in November, Augustus Stein read a clipping about a copper county in Arizona Territory. He read it once, for the number. He did not care about a sheriff or a stranger. He found one line of it useful, and wrote one line back, and the line said that in all future leases the count shall be taken by the company and not by the county. He fixed it. That is what a man like that does with a writer like this one. He does not hunt him. He reads him, corrects the flaw the writer found, and the next 9 men on the next hill are counted honestly all the way to the bottom. The stranger rode out on a Tuesday. Nell Ward brought the black horse up the Ore Road herself and put the reins in his hand and tried to give the money back. And he closed her fingers on it and told her a hand like her brother's costs more than she thinks it does. The bounty on a man with no name and a black horse went up that month by $400, posted by nobody, payable in a town nobody could name. The Prescott paper ran 9 inches about a gunfight and never once printed the word count. He rode south, toward whatever was waiting on the road ahead. He was not happy. Men like him do not get happy, they get further down the road. Behind him a town that had listened to 9 men answer to 19 names every morning for 11 months went back to work. And somewhere far to the east, a man in a warm office turned a page with a clean thumb. Before you go, I need one thing from you. Comment below. 3 words. Where are you from? Country. City. The place you are listening from right now. I read every one, and I want to know who is out on this road with me tonight. This is the story of Kettle Rise, a town where 9 living men answered to 10 dead ones every morning for 11 months, and a stranger who could not be arrested for anything except nothing, and let them do it anyway. What happens next? Where does he ride? Comment below and help me decide, because the road is long and the writer has not chosen his turning. Subscribe so you do not miss the day he finally turns east toward the paneled office and the clean thumb. And one more thing. Comment and tell me which one you believe truly holds a man in this country. The Iron, or the Count. Like this video if you believe the real enemy was never the sheriff and never the fastest hand, but the arithmetic somebody else gets to write. See you on the next road.